Before we start the video, make sure to subscribe to our channel, The Forgotten Files. Also, drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. Alright, let's get started. In the year 1867, Kentucky lay cloaked in the damp chill of a late autumn. Travelers along the lonely roads of Millbrook County spoke in hushed tones about the inn that seemed to appear almost by accident, perched atop a ridge like a sentinel. The Millbrook Inn promised warmth, shelter, and, most curiously, companionship. Its proprietors, the Sisters Cunningham, were said to welcome guests with smiles that carried an unsettling perfection, eyes that seemed to pierce into hidden fears. Locals whispered of their strange rituals and the inn's shadowed halls where laughter never quite reached the corners. Few could articulate why a single night at Millbrook would haunt the mind long after leaving. Guests spoke of dreams more vivid than memory, of fleeting shadows at the edge of perception. And yet, the promise of rest, and something more intangible, more compelling, drew them in. When the first stranger arrived, no one knew that the inn's hidden history stretched back decades, buried beneath layers of forgotten grief and an unnameable curse. This story begins with an invitation that no one should have accepted. The Sisters Cunningham were not sisters in the conventional sense, though their bond was undeniable. Mary, the eldest, carried herself with the solemn authority of a priest, her voice measured and calm, yet beneath it lurked a cold precision. Agnes, younger by 5 years, radiated warmth in a way that felt almost predatory, her smile offering comfort while simultaneously inviting curiosity. Their presence was magnetic, unnerving, impossible to resist. Local folklore suggested they were descended from a line of Appalachian women touched by an old, lingering curse. Women whose hearts had been marked by tragedy and whose spirits carried the weight of ancient secrets. Together, they managed the inn, offering hospitality that seemed unworldly in its perfection until one noticed the odd pattern. The guests who arrived seldom left unchanged. Their eyes, their voices, their very demeanor seemed altered, as if a piece of themselves had been quietly, inexorably, claimed. Millbrook County was a place where shadows lingered long after the sun had set. Its forests, thick with pines and oak, whispered of old feuds, forgotten tragedies, and disappearances that had never been investigated. The inn itself had been built atop the site of an old orphanage, a place where children vanished quietly, their cries muffled by stone walls and whispered prayers. Some townsfolk claimed the land bore a memory of pain, absorbed into the soil, seeping into the foundations of any structure built atop it. By the time the Sisters Cunningham arrived, the inn was already steeped in layers of untold history, its very beams holding witness to sorrow, fear, and suppressed madness. Visitors, unaware of the inn's provenance, would sense only the uncanny perfection of their hosts. The way corridors seemed longer than memory suggested, and the chill in the rooms, even in summer, that never seemed explained that it began subtly. Guests arrived to find the sisters prepared not only for their physical needs, but for an intangible offering: attention, affection, care. No one could have anticipated that this attentiveness was not mere kindness. "We offer companionship," they would say, and it felt more potent than any temptation. Men and women alike spoke of feeling lighter, as if a weight they had carried for decades had been lifted by the sisters' attention. And yet, beneath the surface, a psychological tether began to bind them. The inn became a labyrinth of desire and dread, a place where the line between gratitude and dependence blurred. It was as though the sisters had mastered a subtle, almost imperceptible form of influence, shaping moods, thoughts, and choices without overt coercion. By the time guests realized the depth of their entanglement, the inn had already claimed them. No one knew the true number at first. Beneath the inn, concealed behind false walls and stone-lined passages, lay 45 graves, each marked not by a name, but by a simple symbol, a single, dark engraving etched into the stone. Some stones were old, some freshly carved, yet all carried the same chilling symmetry. Local legends suggested these were not victims in the conventional sense. They were remnants of the inn's long and hidden history, a place where the boundaries between life and lingering spirit had blurred under the influence of the Cunningham sisters. The graves spoke of obsession, devotion, and the inexorable pull of unseen forces. When historians and curious travelers stumbled upon the hidden basement decades later, they felt an oppressive weight pressing upon their minds. To enter was to confront a truth too vast for ordinary comprehension, that the inn's hospitality had always demanded a price, and that the sisters' influence stretched far beyond mere mortal control. The earliest records, fragmented and incomplete, describe travelers arriving from distant towns, weary from long roads, seeking only rest. They spoke afterward in letters and diaries of a strange serenity upon entering the inn, an almost dreamlike comfort that disarmed suspicion. One guest, a young merchant from Louisville, recounted a dinner in which the sisters' conversation seemed to anticipate his innermost thoughts, unspoken anxieties, and forgotten regrets. By nightfall, he felt his memories subtly rearranged, as if the inn had rewritten his personal history. No violence occurred, no overt malice was observed, and yet, when he left days later, he felt as though a part of himself had been left behind, trapped in the walls, absorbed by the sisters Cunningham's enigmatic presence. Similar accounts followed, each more unnerving than the last, forming a pattern that would eventually lead to the grim discovery of the 45 graves. As time passed, townsfolk began to notice disappearances. Visitors who never returned were dismissed as wanderers who lost their way, yet subtle patterns emerged. They had all stayed at Millbrook Inn. Their belongings were left untouched, letters went unanswered. Some locals, daring to peek inside, reported hearing echoes of laughter where no laughter should exist, the faint smell of perfume or candle wax lingering long after the guest's supposed departure. It was a place where reality seemed pliable, where psychological tension intertwined with the supernatural aura of the land. The sisters' mastery over perception created a maze from which there was no clear exit. Even those with the strongest will found themselves subtly influenced, their desires shaped and redirected in ways they could not explain. The foundation of Millbrook Inn sat atop an older, almost mythic curse. The Cunningham sisters were said to have discovered it through family legend, a taint upon the soil, a lingering energy from centuries of grief and abandonment. Local folklore spoke of women who bore the weight of ancestral trauma, absorbing it into their hearts and extending it outward. The sisters were vessels of this curse, consciously or unconsciously enacting rituals of attachment, devotion, and obsession upon any guest who entered their halls. It was not a curse in the traditional sense. It was subtle, insidious. It crept through the mind, altering perception, twisting emotions, and reshaping morality. To be touched by it was to be marked forever, even without physical harm. Every corridor of the inn was designed to disorient, to subtly control perception. Ceilings sloped unevenly, staircases curved unexpectedly, and mirrors reflected more than the present. Guests described rooms appearing larger than they had entered, or hallways that seemed to stretch impossibly. The sisters used this architecture as a psychological tool, reinforcing their subtle influence. They understood the interplay of space, shadow, and sound to a degree that suggested study, even obsession. Light filtered through high windows in ways that created shifting patterns, playing upon the mind's tendencies to perceive shapes, faces, and intentions. By the time a visitor realized the manipulation, it was often too late. The inn itself had become a participant in the process of ensnaring the mind. The basement was the heart of the inn's secret. Accessed through a narrow, almost imperceptible staircase hidden behind the kitchen, it contained the 45 graves, arranged in precise rows. Each grave's placement mirrored some symbolic or arcane logic lost to time. Scholars who visited decades later described a feeling of being watched, as though the very stones exhaled an oppressive awareness. The air was thick, damp, and heavy with the scent of earth and forgotten rituals. Some believed the graves were not of the dead, but of those transformed, their essences absorbed into the lingering energy of the inn. To linger too long in the basement was to feel one's own identity questioned, memory faltering, and consciousness subtly tugged toward the sisters' sphere of influence. Guests often reported vivid, disorienting dreams during their stay. They awoke unsure of reality, memories intertwined with visions that felt preordained. Dreams were not violent. They were precise, psychologically manipulative, exposing insecurities, regrets, and desires. One man dreamed of walking endlessly through hallways lined with mirrors, only to find his own reflection staring back, unchanged yet subtly altered. Another woman reported conversing with a figure resembling herself, who whispered truths she had never dared acknowledge. The sisters' influence extended even into the subconscious. Sleep at Millbrook Inn was a tool of shaping the mind, a careful threading of perception and reality that bound guests more tightly than chains ever could. Local residents knew of the inn's oddities, but remained silent, bound by fear or superstition. Millbrook County was steeped in the culture of secrecy and distrust of outsiders. Rumors were whispered at market stalls, in churches, and along the riverbank. Some believed the sisters' charm extended beyond the inn, reaching into the town itself. Town elders cautioned newcomers against the inn, yet the warnings carried a peculiar mixture of reverence and dread. For decades, no law enforcement intervened. The town's isolation and reluctance to acknowledge the inn's hidden horrors preserved the Cunningham sisters' dominion. History, in its impartiality, seemed to bend around Millbrook, leaving the sisters' legacy obscured yet indelibly etched in the landscape. Fragments of letters and diaries were later discovered, hidden in floorboards and secret drawers. One letter spoke of a guest feeling an invisible hand shaping my thoughts, not with malice, but inevitability. Another mentioned love offered so completely that it is impossible to leave without surrendering a piece of yourself. These documents revealed the psychological impact of the sisters' presence, subtle, pervasive, and persistent. Guests recorded their fascination, unease, and guilt, often unable to reconcile the warmth of their interactions with the unease gnawing at their minds. Even decades later, these writings conveyed a sense of living under constant observation and manipulation, as though the inn itself was sentient, guided by the sisters. It became clear to historians that the sisters had created something akin to a psychological experiment, predating modern understandings of human behavior. Every interaction, every gesture, every word was calibrated to elicit emotional and cognitive responses. The inn's architecture, the rituals of hospitality, and even the lighting and smell all combined to produce subtle compliance and attachment. Guests left altered, often unable to articulate why they felt drawn back or why the memory of the inn lingered like a shadow across their lives. The inn's horror was not in overt violence, but in its perfection as a tool of psychological manipulation, a living, breathing instrument of influence. The supernatural dimension of the inn became impossible to ignore. Visitors reported hearing whispers not directed at them, glimpsing shadows that moved independently of light sources, and sensing the presence of others who were not physically there. Some claimed the graves pulsed with unseen energy. The sisters themselves seemed less human over time, their movements measured, eyes sharper, and voices more compelling. The curse of the land had merged with their consciousness, amplifying their abilities and binding them to the inn's purpose. Those who stayed too long described losing a sense of time, waking to find days had passed unaccounted for, their memories of reality fragmented and unstable. Decades later, curiosity finally drew outsiders, historians, journalists, and paranormal investigators. Their reports are chilling. They documented the architecture, the hidden basement, and the graves. Most refused to enter the deeper passages, citing an overwhelming sense of dread. Those who did enter described an oppressive stillness, a presence watching, guiding, and shaping their perceptions. Attempts to photograph or measure anomalies often failed. Images came out blurred, recordings inexplicably silent. Historians concluded that the sisters' influence had become embedded in the inn itself, a persistent echo of psychological manipulation and possibly something supernatural. The grave's purpose remained a mystery. Some theorized they were symbolic, marking the culmination of the sisters' influence on certain guests. Others believed the graves contained physical remains of individuals whose minds or spirits had been entirely absorbed. Folklore suggested that to disturb a grave was to invite the sisters' attention, an attention described as both alluring and terrifying. Visitors reported seeing faint figures moving in the shadows above the graves, and even decades later, townsfolk spoke of whispers emanating from the ground on quiet nights. The graves became both a memorial and a warning, a physical manifestation of the inn's inexorable pull, The Millbrook Inn eventually fell into disuse, abandoned to decay. Yet its presence persisted in local memory, in whispered stories, in recurring dreams of those who had never even set foot there. Scholars studying the site noted a remarkable continuity. The sisters' influence, psychological or otherwise, seemed to linger. Even after the land changed hands, the pattern of disappearance, subtle influence, and emotional tethering remained unbroken. Millbrook Inn became a testament to the dangers of obsession, of psychological manipulation, and of the hidden horrors that can reside beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary lives. The story of the Sisters Cunningham is more than a tale of terror. It is a meditation on human vulnerability, isolation, and the seduction of control. It reminds us that danger does not always wear a visible form. Sometimes it manifests as charm, empathy, or love offered in a way that cannot be refused. The inn's horror is structural, psychological, and existential, demonstrating that the most profound threats are not physical but cerebral. The land itself, marked by historical trauma and superstition, amplified the sisters' influence, creating a locus where human psychology could be manipulated to extreme effect. Even today, the Millbrook Inn remains a site of fascination, legend, and unease. Visitors report chills, disorientation, and a sense that the inn is aware of their thoughts. The 45 graves lie hidden, undisturbed, a monument to lives touched, altered, and claimed by forces beyond understanding. The Sisters Cunningham, whether human, partially cursed, or something else entirely, left behind a legacy that blurs the boundary between historical reality and supernatural myth. It is a story that continues to unsettle, reminding us that some histories are better left undiscovered, and that beneath the surface of small-town America lie truths too vast, too psychological, and too mysterious for ordinary comprehension. The Millbrook Inn waits, silently, patiently, for those drawn to its shadowed halls, offering love, and a price they cannot perceive until it is too late.